There's a particular kind of hurt that stays silent. It doesn't rage or demand attention. Instead, it lives in the space where you're checking your phone compulsively, turning yesterday's conversation over in your mind, searching for hidden meaning in messages that feel hollow and incomplete. You remember when things were different, when someone let you close, when their presence felt real, even if they weren't completely transparent. Then something shifts. It's as if they locked away something essential inside themselves and left you standing outside, your own pulse the only thing keeping you company. If you've ever been romantically involved with someone emotionally unavailable, this sensation is familiar. It goes beyond simple rejection. What you're experiencing is a fog of contradiction. Your emotional system gets shocked awake and then numbed again. You receive enough affection to make you believe in what you share, then get made to feel foolish for taking that connection seriously. Especially if you're the kind of person who absorbs feelings easily, who catches every small signal, who lets go of hurt without much resistance, and keeps extending love, even through the gaps. This particular pain cuts differently. Your natural response isn't to withdraw when someone creates distance. Your instinct is to decode them, to figure out what's really happening. You convince yourself they're frightened deep down. You tell yourself their past has marked them. You hold on to the idea that if you could just approach them correctly, gently, thoughtfully, with endless patience, they'd eventually recognize it's safe to stay. But there's something important to understand here. The more you pursue an emotionally guarded person with your compassion and insight, the simpler it becomes for them to emotionally separate while keeping you tethered to them psychologically. And nobody really prepares you for this part. Your care, when it has no healthy limits, turns into the very safety net that shields them from truly confronting what it means to lose you. Every extra message you craft, every attempt to clarify, every reassurance that says, "I understand you need space. I'll be here whenever you're ready," you might think you're demonstrating how much you love them. But what's really happening is you're making it safer for them to stay psychologically intimate without having to be genuinely present or accountable. You transform into the connector, the backup option, the cushion they land on, the emotional resource they access without risking real vulnerability or authentic accountability. This explains their pattern of moving closer, vanishing, returning, then backing away again. It's not about their feelings. It's about what they can do without losing you. And this is what makes it so difficult to escape. On the surface, the picture looks clear. One person is withdrawn, the other is invested. But what's actually taking place is significantly more intricate than that. Your nervous systems are performing a coordinated pattern. When their body senses connection, it registers as being trapped. When your body senses them creating space, it perceives risk. So their system reacts to too much closeness by pulling inward to find calm. Your system responds to their distance by moving closer to rebuild what's breaking. Neither of you is operating from a conscious choice. Both of you are working to stay steady, yet from the outside, it resembles something romantic. This explains why you feel spiritually bound to this person, why the intensity feels almost faded, why walking away seems impossible. It's not mysterious. It's a combination of behavioral patterns, early relationship imprints, attachment histories, and a body that confuses what's familiar with what's true for you. For people with avoidant patterns, emotional nearness doesn't bring peace, it brings anxiety. The brain region responsible for threat detection, your amygdala, can interpret intimacy as a loss of autonomy, a dissolution of identity, a reduction in personal agency. Not because love itself poses danger, but because their neurology links closeness to being overwhelmed. When connection deepens, when your affection begins wanting reliability, truthfulness, and active emotional engagement, their system can go into overload. Their stress chemistry activates, their body contracts. Their thinking begins calculating distances, identifying problems, planning exits. They may not consciously understand the shift, why they feel suddenly resentful, disconnected, exhausted, or doubtful. They just know their system is telling them to create separation. If you're someone who feels everything intensely, you probably notice the shift before it's even announced. You pick up on response delays, hear the change in their language, register the moment warmth starts receding. Your awareness becomes heightened. The chemical that creates feelings of reward and hope, dopamine, begins fixating on minimal gestures. A quick response feels like relief. A moment of genuine connection feels like survival. Before long, you're not simply extending love anymore. You're in a state of waiting. You're observing them carefully. You're trying to manage your own emotional pain by tracking their responsiveness. This can resemble an addiction, even though your heart is genuinely good. That's because unpredictability makes the mind obsessive. When you can't anticipate what comes next, the brain tightens its grip. But there's a reframing that shifts everything. The truth is, they didn't necessarily love you less. Often what happened is that loving felt too overwhelming. This distinction matters because if you interpret their stepping back as evidence that you didn't truly matter, you'll end up working against yourself to become someone more desirable. You'll blame yourself for the space between you. You'll think, maybe I showed up too emotionally, I was too forthcoming, I brought too much intensity, I was just too much as a person. Yet being authentically vulnerable isn't what caused them to flee. What unsettled them wasn't your value. It was the genuine connection your presence made real. You turned into a reflection. And interestingly, avoidant individuals often gravitate toward people who allow them to feel without requiring them to perform or prove anything. You don't just hear their actual words, you sense the pain underneath. You don't just respond to what you see, you recognize the deeper struggle beneath their actions. They experience being recognized in a way that's rare for them. And that creates a powerful magnetic draw. Yet it's also frightening because genuine recognition is destabilizing for someone whose survival strategy involves separation and compartmentalization. You reached into spaces they've spent a long time training themselves not to access. Your gentleness penetrates their protective barriers. Your steadiness makes them feel less guarded. Your emotional openness touches the vulnerable part of them that hungers for real connection more than they can admit. Then fear arrives because suddenly what you have matters. Suddenly you matter deeply. Suddenly they face the possibility of losing control, so they create distance. Not because what you built was superficial, but precisely because it held real weight and awakened real terror. This is where a lot of highly sensitive people sabotage themselves. They believe the solution lies in demonstrating reliability more convincingly, loving with greater skill, communicating with softer language, becoming less of a trigger, less expressive, less dependent, less authentically themselves. In their quest to avoid overwhelming someone already destabilized by genuine closeness, they edit themselves out of their own story. But this approach doesn't produce lasting change because you can't address someone's discomfort with intimacy by shrinking your presence. What you're really teaching them is that love will reshape itself to accommodate avoidance. And once that lesson takes hold, everything deteriorates. You find yourself interpreting their withdrawal, rationalizing their inconsistency, prettifying their uncertainty, treating emotional distance as profundity, calling their contradictions a symptom of past hurt, and framing your own depletion as devotion. Eventually, compassion becomes just self-erasure wearing a crown. The genuine power shift happens at a different moment entirely. It's not when you become colder, or start manipulating through games, or try to punish with distance. It arrives when you grasp one essential principle. Silence communicates truth more accurately than anything else. Not the silence used strategically, not the kind wielded to trigger a response, not weaponized quiet designed to provoke jealousy. I'm describing the silence that emerges when you stop interrupting what's actually happening. When you cease pursuing, stop completing their sentences. Stop giving emotional resources to someone who hasn't really earned that access. When you let them encounter what it feels like to lose someone they could count on. This particular silence is agonizing initially, particularly for someone whose entire identity revolves around responding, comforting, perceiving, planning ahead. Your sense of strength has always come from being the emotional stabilizer for those around you. When you finally become quiet, genuinely quiet, rooted in self-worth rather than resentment, your nervous system fights it. You feel the urge to send a message, provide explanation, reduce friction. You convince yourself they need closure from you. But what you're actually seeking is relief from the dread of no longer being the one they choose. Sit with that realization. Something significant shifts the moment you stop protecting them from their own difficult feelings. The system they constructed their life around begins to crack. The freedom they used to have, the ability to pull away without real consequence, suddenly has weight to it. The void grows. It feels different now, more suffocating, more tangible, less abstract. And suddenly, they're confronted with something your empathy previously shielded them from facing: your genuine absence. Not your words attempting to explain, not your hurt expressed in messages, your actual non-presence. That's what people with avoidant patterns truly struggle with. Not confrontation, not the hard emotional conversation. It's the rawness of emptiness when the person who made safety possible, who embodied softness and forgiveness, is no longer there. Because regardless of what they project outward, many avoidant individuals don't actually stop bonding. They compartmentalize, minimize, redirect into something else, rationalize away, push the feelings down into unconsciousness. But disconnection isn't real just because it's hidden. It's still there underneath. And silence possesses an uncanny ability to bring buried things back to the surface. That's when everything they tried to suppress comes flooding back. Freed from the pressure that intimacy created, their mind starts reconstructing what disappeared. The way your presence filled a room. How you looked at them without suspicion or judgment. Those small, ordinary details you held on to. The way you created emotional safety without any effort or performance. Then a peculiar reversal happens. The very person they backed away from suddenly becomes someone whose absence they cannot ignore. And sometimes this manifests as them reaching back out. The pursuit isn't always graceful or transparent. It might show up as a random message to check on you, engagement with something you posted months ago, a text sent when it's late, a flimsy reason to connect, a casual wondering how things are going. A moment of missing you dressed up as insignificant. But understand what's really occurring. The individual who once experienced your love as suffocating may now experience your withdrawal as haunting. When you were always present, accessible, continuously available, they could treat your emotional presence like it was guaranteed. But the moment you stop initiating, stop holding space, stop pouring your affection into emptiness, they encounter something they weren't ready for. You were not interchangeable. This is something many highly sensitive people underestimate about their own significance. You assume your strength comes from the magnitude of your capacity to love. That's actually backwards. Your true strength lies in what you bring to life for another person. Your grounding presence, your emotional clarity, your talent for recognizing someone's authentic self beneath what they present to the world. That caliber of attention makes an impression that lingers. An avoidant person might pursue romantic connections with others, maintain friendships, use distractions, tell themselves they've moved forward. Yet what proves difficult to locate elsewhere is that specific nervous system experience being truly perceived without pressure or coercion. That doesn't come around very often. That's precisely why they return to you mentally. That's why you become something they contemplate in their quieter moments. That's why the resonance of your presence extends far beyond any single interaction, not because you were flawless, but because you touched something genuine within them. Still, I want to tell you something important here. When they reappear, don't mistake this as confirmation that the dynamic has fundamentally changed. This is where countless people reconstruct the same harmful patterns. Because their return can feel like affirmation. Finally, they recognize your importance. Finally, they long for you sufficiently. Finally, your patience bore fruit. Finally, everything works out. But re-engagement is not the same as real growth. Longing for you is not equivalent to being emotionally ready. Desiring your warmth is not the same as possessing the maturity to nurture it. And if you welcome them back without seeing genuine behavioral shifts, accountability, and actual reliability, the original dynamic restarts. The attraction resurfaces. Hope explodes. Brain chemicals surge. Your body confuses their renewed attention with actual healing. Yet unresolved issues don't transform into something healthy simply because they've acquired an emotional veneer. If they're drawn back solely because your distance caused them pain, but they haven't fundamentally grasped how to remain engaged when connection intensifies, then you're not beginning something fresh. You're reliving the original hurt, and this version might wound you more profoundly because hope is now entangled with it. So if they do come back, observe them with genuine attention. Pay less attention to their words during moments when they fear losing you. Instead, notice their actions when closeness actually deepens. Do they voice their overwhelm or simply withdraw? Do they own their behaviors or offer vague emotional language? Do they make genuine space for your experience or only want access to your warmth and stability? Are they seeking reciprocal intimacy or temporary comfort? Do they value genuine closeness or momentary relief? These distinctions carry enormous weight. A truly evolved empath recognizes when they're being cherished versus when they're being used. Because yes, avoidant individuals can miss you intensely. They can carry you in their thoughts throughout their days. They can experience your absence as a constant ache in their body. They can even return with authentic tears and genuine tenderness, and still not possess the emotional framework to truly love you well. This isn't malice, but it is genuinely risky, particularly when your established pattern involves interpreting intensity as proof of genuine commitment. The transformation begins when their potential return stops being the thing you need to feel like you mattered. You already understand what you represented. You're clear about what you stirred in them. You know that connection was genuine without having to keep circling back to it. And that recognition, that is actual freedom. Something almost magical unfolds when a deeply feeling person arrives at this point. Your whole energy shifts. Hope stops radiating from your eyes in that desperate way. You quit over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-justifying. Your body stops contorting to accommodate someone's emotional inconsistency. You're no longer watching them constantly. You're not daydreaming about what could be. You stop performing for a space in their guarded heart. You return to yourself, and when that happens, the entire structure collapses because the version of you they could keep suspended between connection and withdrawal doesn't exist anymore. When they encounter you now, they meet someone transformed, someone at peace with their own sensitivity, someone with clear, unmovable boundaries, someone warm but unwilling to sit with confusion, someone accessible but not desperate, someone profound but not self-erasing, someone who recognizes that authentic love doesn't ask for constant interpretation, someone who no longer mistakes intensity for soulmate destiny, someone who can hold compassion while refusing to absorb pain. That's the real identity transformation right there. It's not about becoming someone they'll regret losing. It's not about becoming so detached that pursuit becomes inevitable. It's not about proving your irreplaceability through unavailability. It's quieter and more powerful than all of that. The shift is simpler. It sounds like this: I will not remain in connections that use my sensitivity as fuel but won't protect my wholeness. Sit with that statement in the deepest part of yourself. I will not remain in connections that use my sensitivity as fuel but won't protect my wholeness. Because your sense of self-worth was never supposed to depend on who decides to come back. It was always meant to rest on what you finally stop begging them to keep, and maybe this is the most important understanding of all. Avoidant individuals often cannot genuinely distance themselves from the super empath because something in the super empath touches them at a core level. Something unguarded, something open, something that feels human in a way they've forgotten. But the second you make waiting for them your reason for being, you surrender the very thing that made you so irreplaceable. Your power never came from the chasing. It lived in your actual presence, your inner richness, your authenticity, your capacity to give love while remaining whole. So allow them to experience the quiet. Allow them to feel what changes when the warmth disappears. Let them sit with questions about where your lightness went. Not because you're performing emotional games, but because you finally recognize something sacred in your own energy. And the truth is, not every person who feels drawn to your light has the capacity to honor it properly. When they come back, and some will, you won't be the person they left. You won't be standing there with apologies for having legitimate needs. You won't be shaking with appreciation for minimal effort. You won't be killing yourself trying to prove that your love is gentle enough to withstand carelessness. You'll just see what's actually happening. You'll understand that being felt deeply is completely different from being genuinely chosen, and that clarity becomes a threat to every pattern that once thrived on your tendency toward self-neglect. Because now you're no longer driven by the fear of abandonment. You're grounded in what you know to be true, and truth carries a vibration that avoidant patterns sense right away. Some will reach toward it, some will flee from it, some will carry thoughts of you for the rest of their lives while still failing to become the person who could love you correctly. That's their story to work out. Your story takes a completely different direction now. Your journey becomes learning to be the person you've stopped betraying in pursuit of connection. The one person you finally remain loyal to, the one person you stop bartering away, the one person whose silence feels like coming home instead of emptiness. Once you arrive there, you're not just difficult to leave behind. You become genuinely impossible to harm. The thing about empaths is that they often grow up in environments where their emotional labor became currency. Maybe a parent was unstable, and the child learned to read the room before reading their own needs. Maybe love was conditional on being the emotional support system for someone else. Maybe they learned early that their value lived in their ability to decode, soothe, and make space for others' feelings. So by the time they're adults, their identity is wrapped entirely around this skill. They don't just feel things deeply, they've built an entire personality around their capacity to understand. And that can feel like purpose until you realize it's actually just a repetition of an old wound. The empath thinks their sensitivity is their greatest gift, and it is. But it can also become their greatest liability if they never learn that feeling everything is not the same as being responsible for everything. Avoidant people, on the other hand, often come from different origins. Maybe closeness was unpredictable or suffocating. Maybe a parent's love came with conditions that felt impossible to meet, or maybe affection got mixed with chaos. Maybe they learned that the safest position was the one where you don't need anyone because needing people felt dangerous. So they developed a different kind of skill set. They became excellent at distance, at compartmentalization, at creating the appearance of independence while internally starving for real connection. They learned to mistake their detachment for strength. And here's what's fascinating. These two people find each other all the time. The empath is drawn to the avoidant because there's something magnetic about someone who seems so unreachable. It's familiar. It mimics the original wound. Someone they have to work hard to understand, someone whose love they have to earn, someone who is emotionally unavailable in a way that feels like a puzzle to solve. And the avoidant person is drawn to the empath because the empath doesn't demand performance. They don't push for explanations. They create a space where the avoidant person can exist without having to constantly prove their worth or justify their emotional state. It's intoxicating for someone who spent their whole life feeling like they weren't enough. So they meet and there's an instant recognition, a chemistry that feels faded. But what they're really recognizing is a familiar dance, not a soulmate. What nobody tells you is that this dynamic can feel incredibly spiritual and profound. The empath interprets the avoidance distance as depth. They think this person is mysterious because they're guarded. They believe the hot and cold cycles mean something significant because the moments of warmth feel like breakthrough. And the avoidant person, basking in the empath's unconditional understanding, can feel like they've finally found someone who gets them without needing them to change. But underneath all of that chemistry is a system that's designed to never fully resolve, because the empath's natural response to distance is to move closer, and the avoidant's natural response to closeness is to move away. They're locked in a pattern that can feel like love, but is actually just two nervous systems trying to survive using completely incompatible strategies. The empath thinks if they just love hard enough, long enough, and gently enough, the avoidant will finally feel safe enough to stay. The avoidant thinks if they can just maintain enough distance, they'll never experience the suffocation that closeness creates. Neither person is wrong about what they need. They're just completely incompatible in how they pursue those needs. The cruelest part of this dynamic is how it can look from the outside. People see the empath doing all the reaching, all the understanding, all the emotional labor, and they assume the empath is weak. They assume the avoidant person is the strong one, the independent one, the one who's got it all figured out. But that's a complete misunderstanding of what's actually happening. The empath isn't weak, they're brave enough to feel and brave enough to try. The avoidant person isn't strong, they're scared, and their distance is just fear wearing a costume of independence. What's actually happening is that the empath is doing the work of two people, while the avoidant person is protected by the empath's willingness to absorb their emotional chaos. The empath translates the avoidant silence into meaning. The empath creates narratives that make the avoidant's behavior understandable. The empath provides such a soft landing that the avoidant never has to face the consequences of their patterns. And over time, this becomes resentment on both sides. The empath starts to feel used because they're giving so much and getting so little in return. The avoidant person starts to feel suffocated because they can feel the empath's unmet needs even when nothing is being said. The resentment doesn't fix the pattern, it just makes it uglier. One of the biggest turning points comes when the empath finally recognizes that they cannot love someone into emotional availability. This is the hardest lesson for someone whose entire identity is built on their capacity to heal others through understanding. They have to accept that their love, no matter how pure or how patient, cannot change someone who isn't ready to change. And more importantly, they have to understand that by staying and continuing to love, they're actually enabling the avoidant person to avoid the very growth they need. The empath's presence becomes a barrier to the avoidant person's healing because the avoidant person never has to face the discomfort of their own patterns. They can drift and disappear and come back because they know the empath will be there, ready to understand, ready to forgive, ready to love. But this isn't love anymore. This is a transaction disguised as compassion. The empath gets to feel needed and purposeful. The avoidant person gets to avoid accountability and real intimacy. Both people are getting something out of staying, even if what they're getting is ultimately harmful. The moment the empath stops waiting is when everything shifts, and it's not a dramatic moment necessarily. It's often very quiet. Maybe it's a Tuesday morning and they just realize they're tired of checking their phone, tired of over-explaining, tired of holding space for someone who refuses to meet them there, tired of being the only one trying. And in that tiredness, something settles. Not anger usually, just a quiet clarity.